Now tonight's subject is one that even giving it a title is difficult, because, and I'll get into why that's the case. But the first thing you should know is that this is probably unlike some other topics we've talked about, in that Puritans provide, even the American Puritans that we've held up, do not provide us with a unified front. It wasn't like all of the Puritans thought the same way regarding the, and I'll just use the word Indians right now, but I will change that in a minute. And all of the experiences also with these Indians were different. And so that makes it very, very difficult to work with. But as with our first lecture, I want to spend several minutes time building the groundwork for how we're approaching the subject. So a bit of review, now quickly. A bit of review. You remember that we first started off with the idea, with looking at the theories of migration motivation. Why do peoples travel thousands and thousands of miles to settle into the area, particularly as what we're looking at of North America? And the answer can we don't know, except that they were looking for a home, right? They were looking for a place to be, probably where nobody else was. They came, everybody migrates, that's my point. In the history of mankind, since the origin of man, they have migrated, and there is, that's a very important thing to realize, that people move and they settle and they move and they settle and they move and they settle. And that brings up the whole question of using the word indigenous. This is a word that has replaced Indians in our cultural language, because Indians, we're told, were a misappropriated, misapplied term to begin with, and we need to find something else. Well, the word indigenous, if you look it up in the dictionary, in its original definition, it says this: indigenous is produced, living, or existing naturally in a particular region or environment. And the usual topic of indigenous are plants, or fruits, or vegetables, or in some cases even mammals. But the word has been changed to make it suitable for the ones that we now call indigenous people groups. And so now you look it up and it says, of or relating to the earliest known inhabitants of a place, and especially of a place that was colonized by a now dominant group. Translation: they were here first. And that remains, of course, the big argument that the indigenous continue to put up before us and say, because we were here first, not because we are indigenous. It's not like these guys grew out of the ground and we've always been here. It's just simply a matter of we were here first, and therefore we have a right to the land. Well, now, has mankind ever, in the history of mankind, has that ever been justified? When you think of indigenous or Indian or Native American, there's another angle to this that I want us to learn about, and that is that we use a word like indigenous or even Indian or Native American. We use any of those terms for our convenience. We're throwing it out there. We're saying that refers to all of those people groups. Well, that's not fair either, really. And the reason for that is because no one is native by definition, for all have migrated, and the terms we've settled into are merely convenient for us. It's generic, that we just refer to anybody. We don't care who they are, or what characteristics they have, or what tribe they refer to or claim to have come from. They're collective references that keep their true identity masked from us. So when we use the word indigenous, we don't care about any more roots than that. And maybe we should. That's the point I'm trying to make. There are actually 570 different tribes of indigenous folk in North America alone. Here's a map that just shows you where the ones that many of them are identified with and located. These are cultural groups that hold their own identity and probably have for centuries. They have a right, if they're going to exist, they have a right to be identified and recognized for who they are. Some you recognize, Cheyenne, Wakoti, Crow, Sioux, some of you recognize, but there are a bunch of them. And just simply to wave our hand and call them indigenous as if we're respecting them is wrong. It's wrong of us. So I'm going to suggest, and it's a broad term, and it's a term that is convenient for me for this hour. I'm going to suggest I use the word tribals, tribal groups. They are groups that move and migrate throughout their history, but they're separate and they are distinct, and that needs to be recognized and perhaps appreciated. Now, again, but to get a running start all the way back in history, we talked about all of the major efforts of man to exercise dominion over other men. And remember, one of the most impressive exercises of that was Alexander the Great, sweeping over all the way from Macedonia all the way over to India. And of course, what was he doing? He was conquering people. He was wiping out people groups. Those people were indigenous too, and he didn't care. And you get to the Romans, and it was the same way. They would just keep fighting until they surrounded the Mediterranean, and everybody became Roman. Their culture was gone. Who cared? You didn't deal with that. Whenever man expands his empires, that's what happens. Remember, we talked about the Islamic expansion. They swallow up everybody. They brutalize and enslave people as they go. There is no consideration for those that they conquer. No regard for the indigenous groups. But what about the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem? Islam came along in the 7th and the 8th century, you remember? The Islamic expansion took over Jerusalem and all of the Holy Land, as we call it, that had once been the historical sites of first the Israelites and then Christianity. And ever since the 8th century, they built this building on that site that was where Abraham was offering up Isaac. And they've claimed it's theirs. Well, maybe we should say we were there first. But we don't. Have you ever studied the Crusades in the 11th and the 12th centuries? They were efforts of Christians to take over Jerusalem, to win it back. They are usually presented in very mocking and satirized form in history books. And perhaps some of them deserve it, but the point is, they characterize the Crusades as something that the Christians had no business doing, because this belongs to Islam. Well, who are they? We were there first. It's the history of man is filled with this very kind of story again and again and again. The Norman conquest of England, the Normans' conquest of Ireland is all the same way. Remember Genghis Khan's extremely brutal attack, a sweep through all of Asia, murdering and slaughtering and selling, and he didn't care about whoever he was conquering. That was just the nature of sinful man. Remember, either he wants to completely, or he wants to live under somebody else's iron fist and just be done with it. Remember our Christian world and life view. I've altered it to talk about the tribals or the indigenous. Listen to what it says. We start with the scriptural revelation of the creation mandate that man is called to expand out into the world, to fill the world, to have dominion over the world, not over one another, but over the world. That man in his sinfulness either wants to rule over all others, even unto divinity. Remember the Egyptians, we are sun gods. And this is a natural proclivity of all conquering heroes, is to think, I am divine. And it's just a natural tendency. Or they just want to be ruled by someone else because that gives their world order. Just tell me how much taxes I need to pay. Tell me how many of my sons you want in your army. Tell me how many daughters you want in your prostitution. Just let me live my life. We're either bold conquerors of all people or else we're cowards. That's what sin does in our world. Man is restless, he's corrupt, and he's greedy. He always wants more. Kingdoms rise out of a thirst for power. Kingdoms fall out of a lust for corruption. It takes the gospel. That's the only thing that makes the difference, that puts the brakes on anything. And of course, the kingdom of God is the only thing that makes man benevolent, gives him the commandment to love one another. But we also know that that's never going to be perfect in this world. And that even Christians are going to continue to sin in these very ways. They're going to be inconsistent in their efforts. One day they're going to be completely loving, in some of the saints we read of in church history, but then others are going to be claiming to be Christians and they're going to slaughter people in order to get their way. We have a very inconsistent history as Christians in the world. So the question is, was the white man, but getting back to the conquering of the tribals in America, was the white man uniquely brutal to the tribals? That's what we're always told. That tear down the Columbus statues. How dare they think they can march over here? We were here first. Was the white man uniquely brutal to the tribals? Historically, conquering nations do what they please. Usually, people are like Caesar and Nero, who entertained himself by burning Christians to light his night parties. He didn't care. Western civilization, under the influence of the Scriptures, has indeed chafed and wrestled with God's call to regard one another as the image of God. We see it, we understand it, we apply it. The history of America, the history of the United States has not been consistent in it. That's what the whole issue about with blacks now is all about. Yes, our history too is checkered with times of prejudice and abuse and intolerance. I remember growing up reading books like Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which depicted the slaughter of Indians by the military. Or James Michener's book Centennial, which did the same thing, describing very colorfully how innocent women and children living in teepees were surrounded and slaughtered by the American army. And this is painted as saying, this is how the white man treated the tribals. How dare we? They were here first. But Western civilization is not the worst. Western civilization is the first and only one to ever try to put the brakes on that kind of attitude. Not consistently, not cleanly, not across the board, differing from region to region, from generation to generation, but in the efforts of friendship, trade, and mutual interests, and then to actually attend to and regard the tribals. Let me back up to those two books for a second. These were published by American publishers. Where else in the world would they ever get the opportunity to publish their stories against the very people that they're criticizing? Let me give you another example. Oops. No, I guess I have to do that later. This is what is meant, and what I want you to understand, this is what is meant with the whole debate today about the United States being exceptional. The word in its original reference does not mean superior, does not mean so much better than anybody else. What exceptional meant and continues to mean for those who understand it is the Christian influence in the way we live. We are exceptional because we understand what God requires of us in how we are to treat one another. And that's what makes the United States exceptional. There's no other country in the world that's ever done this. You know, Stalin killed his 20 million, Hitler killed his 6 million, didn't care, didn't blink. The Uyghurs are being wiped out in Russia right now. Have you ever heard of the Armenians and the Armenian slaughter before World War II? Do you understand that Adolf Hitler said later, I know I'll be able to kill the Jews because nobody did anything when the Armenian Christians were being killed before the war started. He said, nobody's going to blink. Nobody's going to do anything. It's only Christianity that makes Western civilization different, and that's what makes it exceptional. So, you need to understand that. You need to also understand why people shake their fist at the United States and say, you aren't exceptional. You say that it's not pride that we should honor or hold on to or respect. It's our humility before God. Yes, we are. We're not exceptional because we're better. We are exceptional because we have the Word of God in our Bibles and in our hearts. And we're fighting all the time to see that win. Now, a little more specific. Original 17th century colonization by the Americas were done by several different countries. We painted that picture before in the first lecture. There were different countries that were checking out different parts of North America. It was by no means a unified effort in the 17th century. There were many independent operators. Spain said they sent over people to check out things, but the explorers were on their own, and they called the shots the way they wanted, and they only operated by their own sense of greed. There wasn't any sense of organized approach. They had widely varying degrees of success and failure in all of the efforts that they made. So it wasn't until the 18th century that England managed to chase out all of the other nations and left the surviving colonies, 13 in number, under English control, bringing some sense of unity to what was going on in North America. And it was only by the mid-18th century where these all under English rule did they survive, grow, and develop, and were the 13 that we now consider the original colonies. They were not original, they were just the last surviving ones, the last developed ones, the successful ones, among all of the hundreds of efforts that had been made in the century before. Colonization of the Americas was not a single united effort, and what I want to try to demonstrate is that the 13 colonies by the 18th century can be sectioned off into three areas. First, you've got the New England colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies. And all of these had their own history. They all had their own ups and downs, their own struggles, their own profits, their own gains. They had their own sense of independence and defensiveness toward outsiders. They all had their own attitudes, and they differed as they went up the coast. They had their own experience and method of dealing with those tribals that I talked about. They all had differing opinions and differing approaches. They said, well, your experience with those tribals weren't the same as ours. The northern colonies are the ones that we've been focusing on because that's where the Puritans landed. And so we want to go back to the north here now. This is just the north. And we're focusing on what the northern colonies developed because of their Puritan influence. The northern colonies were the vision and the effort of the Puritans. The middle and southern were not. They were not involved with Puritanism. The northern colonies included the vision of Christian nations and Christian ethics. That's what they wanted. They had a vision for a Christian nation. Nobody else did. Everybody else was get rich quick, sin-dominated control. I do what's right for me, I'm greedy, and I give myself to it. And northern colonies were motivated by the effort to relate to and bring the gospel to the tribals in their regions, at least more often than any such effort was ever attempted in the middle and southern colonies. But the tribals were not unified either. See, here's another part of the stereotype that we need to pull ourselves away from. Indians aren't just Indians. You watch westerns, old westerns on TV, and who cares what different tribes there are? You know, they all look the same. They're painted, they whoop, they ride horses, you know, they get shot. And that's all we know about them. But all of the Indians had all of these different tribes, and they also were very different from one another. They were different in terms of their languages. They were different in terms of their cultures, their ethics. Some were very pacifistic. Some were very peaceful. Some let you walk all over them by who they were. Others were very warlike. Don't mess with me. North American tribals did not, but one thing they had in common is they did not develop. They never built cities. They never built farms. They never put fences up. Now that, you know, we say, well, that's just who they were. No, they were migrating for two reasons. One was because they were looking for a place to call home. But second, they were also being motivated by their own religion and their own cultures. And the religion and the culture that most of these northern tribals had was that they were given to superstition. They were given to animism, a worship of nature, or pantheism, that there's a spirit in everything. And we've seen demonstrations of that also in movies and stuff. Their experiences with more developed colonists along the coast were also varied widely. In some places they wouldn't be tolerated at all, in other places they'd be welcomed with open arms. And so the tribals all had different experiences coming at it from different perspectives and different circumstances. This is a map of native settlements and trails during the early 17th, the first half of the 17th century. It gives you, you can pick out Massachusetts and the area, what would be down here, Rhode Island? Yeah. Isn't this impressive? These are all the native trails, all the native locations, all of the identities of all of the tribes that were in this area, the routes and all of the rivers, the trails. Who do you think came up with this? Not the tribals. The only reason we know of anything is because in a Christian world and life view, we are to have dominion, we're to explore our world. We make maps of even their histories. The reason that archaeology is a science today is because of a Christian world and life view to go explore Egypt. Egypt doesn't have to say, oh, here's who we are and this is it. No, we have to dig it out of the ground because they didn't care. It's only Western civilization motivated by Christianity that says what the world is and what the world has been is important and valuable and needful to know. And so it's the influence of Western civilization that gives us knowledge of our past, even the past and the history and the geology of those that we aren't in agreement with. So just to review real quickly so you get the picture, these are the colonies, the three parts, the southern, the middle, and the north. And historically, back up, we'll get a running start. Remember, the first thing that happens is 1513. When the Spanish conquistadors in Central America, they are after gold. Gold has always been hypnotizing. I remind myself of that when I watch these television advertisements. Gold. There's a reason that they sell gold. It's hypnotizing. It's glittery. You want it. You're drawn to it. It's always been that way. It feeds the greed of the human heart. And that certainly was what the Spanish conquistadors were after. They were after gold. And they didn't care who they killed. They didn't care who they enslaved. They didn't care what they did to get it. That was 1513 way down here in the south. By 1526, those Spaniards had introduced African slave labor. They're the ones that started bringing the blacks in. And into Central America, Cuba, and Hispaniola. And you remember my map, there's many, many more blacks from Africa that went to South America than to North America. 1585, there's that strange effort in Roanoke, disappeared with only that one word on the tree. That was 1585. In 1607, Jamestown is finally established in the Middle Colonies. In 1619, British privateers do introduce slavery. Remember that little bunch? They had captured the Portuguese ship, and and one of the things they took from it was about 20 of these starving slaves, and they dumped them off on North American shores in the middle colonies and said, either buy them or we're going to get rid of them. And I posed you the question, you remember? I said, was it just greed of slave labor, or could it have been a Christian influence that said, we can't just let these kids die? Could there be another side to that argument? Yes, there could. Then we finally get to the north, 1620, where the Mayflower lands. Pilgrims are now on land in the United States in the north. And in 1630 is the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and so you notice we're now over 100 years in the process of this. Don't let people lump them all together and say they're all the same. Puritans were just as bad as anybody else. No, they weren't. Now, I'm going to focus on one particular guy. What can you do? That's the question you're going to ask yourself. Well, what can I do today? What can I do against so much hatred and anger that's being thrown up against us today, for Christians and for the United States and all we've done to the tribals and everything else? What can I do? What can one person do? Let me give you an illustration of what one person can do. His name is John Eliot. He lived in 1604 to 1690. He was a 17th century man. He was born in London. He was born in England. He attended Jesus College in Cambridge. Remember that? There's that Cambridge again. Good school back then. I would have sent my sons to Cambridge. Graduated in 1622, taught at a school in Little Baddow, and then entered the ministry. Finally decided to emigrate to the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1631. He was called to a church in Roxbury, and he lived out his entire life as the minister of that church. Never changed churches. 58 years. He participated in translating the Bay Psalm book. That's a Psalter, and it was the very first book printed in the United States, or in the North America. Very first book. Made an effort at that. Now, while he was minister, full-time minister, he also had a heart for education. In 1645, he started the Roxbury Grammar School, probably the oldest grammar school in North America. Had a vision, in other words, for educating all of the kids in his community. One history writer says, Eliot's faith in education was absolute, and his unending efforts to found numerous schools speak to his ardent desire for disseminating knowledge among the inhabitants of New England. In 1646, he decided he wanted to begin ministering to the tribals. No. To the Indians. No. He wanted to minister to the Algonquins. Algonquins, it's the same tribe, different pronunciations. He was on his own. His first effort to do so was a disaster. He learned a few words, and he tried to preach in their language, and it was a flop. Would he give up? Would he be so embarrassed? Would he be so humiliated? Would he say, oh, this is too hard? The Algonquin language was incredibly complex. It was unbelievably complex. What do? I've got a church to run. I can't just be, not John Eliot. What John Eliot did was he began an in-depth study of the language for himself. He was not going to be deterred. And he gave himself to the study of the Algonquin language over the next 14 years. He first published a primer, which is a study of vocabulary in the language of the Indians. And in 1663, he published the entire Bible. He had translated himself. It was the first Bible printed in North America. First Psalm book, now the first Bible. Not in English. There's the copy, there's the cover of it. See if you can read that. The Bible of God in the New Testament and the Old Testament, translated by John Eliot, Cambridge, 1663. He went on. He wasn't done. Translating the Bible wasn't enough. He went on in 1666 to devise a book of grammar and dictionary. It was not a written language before Eliot. It wasn't even a written language. It was just vocal. And he studied it enough to get it down and to construct a grammar and to construct a dictionary of it. See if you can pronounce that. That's one word in the Algonquin. Guess what it means? Maybe it's so long because they're trying to excuse it. But that's how complex and how bizarre the language is and how he just would not give up. And one historian says, in the course of 1,000 years since, and I've never even heard of this guy. Any of you teachers, historians, ever heard of this guy? Old Philos. Somebody say yes? 311. Who? What?
Read his name.
Nancy's read his. I should have known Nancy was. 311, 383. In the course of 1,000 years since this guy constructed the Gothic alphabet, Eliot was the only missionary to devise a new alphabet from an unwritten language for the purpose of teaching and preaching the Scriptures, simply for the purpose of giving these people the gospel. In 1646, Massachusetts General Court, wasn't just Eliot. In 1646, the Massachusetts General Court passed the Act of Propagation of the Gospel among the Indians. We think this is a good idea. We're not trying to brainwash them. We're trying to give them the gospel. We believe the gospel to be true. More than superstition, animism, and pantheism. We know they need the truth. We believe in the gospel. It isn't just simply one religion among others. This is the truth. We believe that. And so they passed this, which funded the effort. In 1649, the Long Parliament in England established a corporation for promoting and propagating the gospel of Jesus Christ in New England. This is England we're talking about. This is London. They said, let's send them £12,000 to establish the mission field that's before them in New England. In 1650, Eliot began supervising the organization of towns for Indians who had been converted. He realized that by converting them to the gospel meant that they now understood they must develop. They must organize. They must bring peace in their villages and in their communities, and they must do things differently. The gospel changes culture deliberately. We must not be ashamed of that. Christianity today is attacked for doing that very thing. Christianity, you just want to brainwash everybody. You just want to make them all like you. And we back off because we're intimidated. The gospel changes culture. When you bring light into a dark world, it requires a change in attitude, requires a change in ethics, requires a change in how you regard other human beings. And so they established a settlement for these Christian Indians to begin organizing. First, it was a 2,000-acre settlement, and it was successful. And so Eliot kept going. He organized an 8,000 settlement and called it Pakanit, another one for Hasanamamit, and a 6,000-acre settlement for another one, and another 8,000 settlement for another one, and a 3,000 settlement. These are all space allocations before the days of reservations. We're going to allocate this land right next door for the peaceful propagation of these tribals. It was a vision. It was a good thing. But after 1650, something drastic changed. These Christian Indian settlements started to be seen for what they were by greedy settlers as land-grabbing efforts. They wanted this land. They referred to them as praying towns, as if that was a bad thing. But notice that they got up to 14 in number before things finally changed. Eliot gave himself to riding on horseback back and forth among all of these 14 settlements preaching the gospel. He gave himself to the ministry of these people again and again and again. Here is a page out of the Algonquin Bible, and there is a very classic and a famous drawing of Eliot preaching to the tribals. And he's doing so from an Algonquin Bible, and he's doing so in their language. He cares, and it becomes very clear. But then finally, 1675, something breaks. Have you ever heard of something called King Philip's War? Not too many people have. King Philip's War was, King Philip was the nickname of a particular tribal chief. That's what he thought of himself. I'm King Philip. You might have heard of Massasoit. The one who related to the Pilgrims and taught them things and developed their communication and built up. His son, Metacomb, was completely different. And he had a chip on his shoulder. And he grew to hate settlers, especially when there was friction between the settlements that did not fall the way he thought was proper. Violence became war between the Wampanoags and the colonists, along with tribal allies that were on the colonist side. But unfortunately, it blew up and became a very ugly war. One historian says it was the deadliest bloodbath to occur in the 17th century New England. It is often considered to be the most important war in the history of American colonization. You've never heard of it. Considered by many to be the deadliest war in colonial American history. The damage of that was pretty severe. It brought devastation to these 14 settlements that John Eliot had worked so hard to build. They were attacked, they were murdered, they were burned, and they were chased off. When the war was going on, the captured tribals were taken to the coast and put in prison boats. Remember the days of World War II when Roosevelt was afraid of the Japanese, so he put them in internment camps. Guess he learned that from this. The tribals were put into prison boats to hold them and contain them and maybe dispose of them if they felt right to do so. What did Eliot do? He went and he visited the Indians, the tribals on the boats. He wouldn't give up. When the war was over, most of Eliot's concentration became on the effort of rebuilding all of these communities, but it was pretty well done by then. It was too much had been lost, too much had been destroyed. The attitudes had changed on both sides, and it was a done deal. So in his final years, Eliot turned his attention to the new presence of African slaves in New England. There weren't many, just a few, but they were starting to show up even in New England. You might remember when we studied the Salem witch trials, that Parrish had brought one with him from Barbados, and that started the whole bit. They were small in number, but they were a reality nonetheless. They were, northern slaves were typically not farm hands, not treated like the southern slaves were. They were usually more like Roman slaves are depicted. They lived in the house with you. They were butlers. They were servants. They were accountants. They were your guides. They were with you all the time. It was, they were still slaves, but they were treated totally differently. And Eliot participated in their education. Remember, he was burdened with education and in leading many of them to the Christian faith. One of the last things he was able to do, one of the last things he was able to be pleased to do, was ordain one tribal named Daniel as the pastor to the Natiks in 1683. It was a triumph for him. It was a small triumph, but it was a triumph. And when he died in 1690, his tombstone says simply, Apostle to the Indians. Now, you have probably, one more thing. On the original Massachusetts state flag is this seal. It's a picture of an Indian in the middle. And the caption coming from him says, "Come over and help us." That was on the state seal for many years. That was the impact John Eliot made. Now, some of you have heard of other efforts that were made, David Brainerd for one, and Jonathan Edwards for another. They are actually 18th century missionary efforts to the tribals. And so I don't go into them tonight. But the point is that it wasn't over with just one man. It wasn't just one effort. But look how much John Eliot was able to do and what a difference it could have made. There were others, but I wanted to focus on Eliot, obviously because of his Herculean accomplishments. And the Lord had blessed his efforts in such great measure. Questions, comments?
Dave?
Yes.
So as we're trying to balance the spirituality of the church, that our main call is to proclaim the gospel, when is it wise and good for us, or do we not establish towns and schools and seminaries? Whose calling is that? How does that work into? It was an outworking of Christianity here. It's one of our outworkings, but sometimes it seems that people get confused and they say, "Oh, it's all about social work," or "What are you doing for society?" How do we determine between these two things, our calling?
I don't know if there's a methodology that's or a structure that's definite. All I'm trying to impress is the fact that Christianity does demand cultural change from heathenism. I think a perfect example is our support for Bala Christian School in Kenya. This is a dreadful culture that they have started this school in. It's a culture that enslaves and abuses young girls starting at the age of 10 and makes them slaves in the home to men who call themselves warriors and are the biggest, laziest slobs you'd ever want to see. The culture has to change. The Bible demands it. Who does it, how it's to be done, is something we don't know. You have to find that out as you go. But when you preach the gospel, culture must respond just like people must respond. You cannot just go in the same way you've gotten. Things must change. Scotland's another example of that. Before the time of Knox, the attitude in Scotland was rough and brutal and murderous and greedy and political. And the Reformation brought order and peace and it changed Scotland's culture. And that just goes part and parcel with it. It's not first and foremost the vision. We don't want to just set up laws to keep people from doing something and call that the gospel. But when you change people's hearts and you convert them to the Christian faith, it will demand a change in heathen culture. And we should not be ashamed of that. Yeah.
As we have an illiterate culture that we are in now, illiterate meaning that we do not know our Bible.
Meaning we are ignorant of
We are
ourselves, the Bible, of our world,
Christians are
of our history.
ignorant of the Bible because we've forgotten to read it and to
Yeah, oh yeah,
know its
yeah.
sense. One of the things that we can do here is continue to train our children
Yeah.
to know what the Bible teaches. In the home, in the church, I mean, my plea, I guess, is to all the parents that are here to remember that Sunday school does go on Sunday morning, to continue to teach your children not only about the Bible, but how to think about the Bible.
Right.
Yes, fathers, teach your children, yes, daily, moment by moment. But the only way we're going to change culture is family by family.
Right.
Person by person that knows the Bible and can speak the Bible to the people that they are around. Because we have people that do not know the Bible. I can't tell you, as I teach in this Christian school, how many parents say their children know more about the Bible than I know. And I mean, it's a shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
But how do we change culture?
Preach the word.
And know the word ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Pam?
That brings up a good point in that you said they had no written language.
Mm-hmm.
So he writes a Bible, but they can't read.
He teaches them to read.
So he teaches, so I'm saying there has to be, like to Janet's point,
Oh,
there
yeah.
has to be a school.
Yeah.
And so that all came along with it.
Yeah, that it brings, to go elaborate a little more on Nick's question, changing culture means bringing order to disorder. The Algonquins had no sense of history, no sense of identity, no sense of structure. You know, they were just nomads. And the gospel brings order. We worship a God of order. He says that this is part of the requirement of the gospel. The gospel brings order to our work.
It reminds us of Elizabeth Elliot and the work that her husband and Newsman and then Elizabeth Elliot carried it on.
Yeah.
That killed her husband.
Yep. That's another good story. The Auca Indians. You know, why go there in the first place? And then why go back after they killed the missionaries? And what did it do to them? What did it do to their tribe? Did they live happily ever after? No, they changed. Their culture changed. All right? Yeah, Dan. Hold it, David.
I was reading a book recently, and it's kind of tied into maybe last year's Reformation stories about the RP missionaries, and we talked about some of the influence they had on the slaves. But there's a book about their ministry efforts to the natives out in Kansas. This would be the 1800s, late 1800s, so significantly later. But from a Presbyterian background and the heart for reaching those people, as well as bringing up a lot of the complexities of the relationship between the United States and the Native people, and the corruption on all sides, and all kinds of terrible things. But by getting there, starting the school, starting the church, and sharing the gospel.
Yeah. David, I'm sorry.
It just makes me think about the times we live in now, where they value multiculturalism, and embedded in that is a refusal to change.
Right.
Say, this is who we are.
Right.
don't try to change me.
Mhm.
And others then are back away from that.
Right.
And then we become racists.
Yep.
And
Yep.
we become such a thing as white supremacy.
Right. This is the root. That's what we're being attacked for.
Right. And even that focus is coming into the PCA. The
Yeah.
PCA
Oh, yeah.
has a specific black cultural
Agenda.
effort
Mm-hmm.
to bring blacks into the PCA as blacks, not necessarily. I mean, I would say they would say as Christians.
Yeah.
But it's really there's an undercurrent there, very strong undercurrent of racism in the whole approach of our own denomination.
Yes.
Not just ours, others, I think.
Yeah, you're right. Now, as I totally agree, we don't want to get caught with the other edge of the sword cutting us wide open in saying that we have it right. The broad brush dismissal of someone else and their entrenchment in their culture doesn't mean that what we have gotten used to is truly biblical. And we need to be very careful about where we're coming from. Because just like the Pilgrims reacting in different ways to different circumstances, there was nothing consistent. I pick out John Eliot because he's a noble and definite and a clear example of someone who was wholeheartedly given. But not every pilgrim was like a John Eliot, and we're the same way. We're not uniform in how we approach this and how we are dealing with it. And we must submit to the Scriptures ourselves first, not just to our own stereotypes and not just to our own prejudices and not just to our own cultures. Because culture can drift from the Bible and still call itself Christian, and I think America has. So it is not an easy question. Thank you very much. We have one more to go. I decided to tack on the build-up to the Great Awakening, what's referred to historically as the first Great Awakening. I think it's probably the only real Great Awakening. It will be, I think, a fitting conclusion to this entire historical survey. So tune in next week. Let's pray. Father, I thank you very much that we have been able to learn some things tonight that rattle our cages, that makes us feel uncomfortable, that makes us realize, Lord, it's so easy to judge someone else when we need to take the log out of our own eye. And we pray, Lord, that we might learn that lesson and that we might submit to it. But Lord, that we also with clarity see how there are others demanding that Christianity and the gospel change to meet them, and we must resist that too. So Lord, help us. This is not an easy thing. It's very complex. It's as complex as that Algonquin word that we tried to pronounce. It is not easy. Have mercy on your church, Lord, as we seek to go forward. In Christ's name, amen.